Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to meet the people who are neighbors and friends here who have stories to tell. And this story is sweet. The Cake Shop, beautiful downtown Merlin, Oregon. And this happens to be the bread book. Now I'd like you to meet the author of this. Jack, welcome to Journeys and Journals.
Hi, and welcome to everyone out there in the audience too, because it's certainly a pleasure to be here today. Not just to talk about bread books and things, but because the values that are involved in our lives and the values that seem to be so rapidly disappearing from our social structure and our society have to be reimplanted in order for this society with its progress and its greatness to continue in the direction it's going. And that's why the church is so important, because it does talk about truth.
Church and home, and you know, when you talk about home, you have a big family, right?
I have a moderately large family. I have two sons and I have one son and one daughter and two granddaughters and two grandsons. My wife, however, is dead. My wife died about 5 years ago, and we'll talk about that a little later.
Absolutely. How did you ever get into baking?
Well, I was a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force.
Yes.
I served about 9 years as a jet fighter pilot. I served in Europe and Africa throughout the United States during the Korean War period. And
so we're talking 1950s?
Yes, during the 50s, right on up to, I think I got out of the service in 56. I spent 9 years service time total. And
were you married at that time?
I got married while I was in the service. I met my wife while I was going through pilot training and gunnery training, fighter gunnery training. It was one of the most exciting times in my entire life, and God blessed me to allow me to be there at that particular moment in time and space, to have had the opportunity to have flown fantastic airplanes and done so many exciting things, adventurous things too.
Well, this looks like adventure. You've got a smile that just goes from ear to ear. Oh.
That's a picture of me climbing into an F-86.
Oh, you know, a while back I got to do an interesting show about a pilot from World War II.
Uh-huh.
And who's now put his memoirs into a book, and they're available here in town. Are your books available?
Yes, they are. They're available at the Cake Shop in Merlin, Oregon. For those of you who don't know where Merlin is, it's about 4 miles off the freeway at the Merlin cutoff, and when you get to the town of Merlin, you only know it because there's a little pantry there, and there may be a welcome sign and a goodbye sign. Because if you go more than 40 miles, first place, you'd be exceeding the speed limit. Second place, you'd never know you went through Merlin, except for the Cake Shop. And the Cake Shop you can't miss.
Well, it looks like something that's kind of out of history.
Yes, it does.
You know, even the steps that you go up seem to be. You built it yourself?
I built the shop myself, and I made the shop look the way that I made it look, which is historic, old, by using old barn wood that came from that was torn down, and the pieces were saved and air dried, stacked, and they were kept by an old fellow who lived up on the hill outside of Merlin when I first moved here some 35 years ago. And I was looking for the barn wood, and God just said, "Here it is, Jack," and all of a sudden it was there, and the fellow had it, and I paid him some money for it, and I put the barnwood on the shop, and it looks as though it was built 100 years ago.
It sure does.
Which is exactly when the barnwood came to be.
Do you know that man's name anymore?
I'll think of his name, though, in a minute. My memory has slipped a little bit as time has progressed.
Well, you've got another story. We both can talk about reasons that our minds are slipping.
Well, I think it kind of goes with time, but for the difference, I'm willing to give up the slippage of time and memory there with the passage of time, because there seems to be a matter of concentration on facts and truth and analyzing things much more efficiently and thoroughly than I did when I was younger.
Right.
So it's a trade-off.
It is a trade-off, but you've been through some heavy stuff.
Oh, certainly.
And
I have, and they've all been exciting things. And God's always been right alongside of me. I don't know why, but he seems to be there almost all the time when I especially need him.
Whether it was piloting or whether it was your new bride.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk just a little bit about your bride.
My bride, my Patty. Patty and I met when I was in the service, as I had mentioned, in Phoenix, Arizona. We were married approximately a year later. And then she came to Europe and Africa with me. Our first son, Happy Jack, was born in Casablanca, Africa.
Woo.
And Patty and I spent nearly 50 years of marriage and wedded bliss before she died of lung cancer. And unfortunately, God determined at that particular moment that it was time for her to go to another place in life, the heaven.
Look at this. Look at this. It's so much fun. Patty was a greeter, and old Jack was the baker. And seldom did they move from one place to the other except the cake decorating, right?
We both did the cake decorating, and we've decorated cakes. Patty and I decorated cakes for, we did a cake for President Reagan, we did a cake for Pat Boone, we decorated a cake for Barry Goldwater when he ran for the presidency, we did one for Roger Miller, for Dave Dudley, the cowboy singer, another one for Ray Price. I have some pictures in the shop of all of these things. Everybody out there today, take a minute next Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, the only 3 days that my shop is open, the cake shop in Merlin. Take a minute and drive out. It's a unique place. It's just like a little page out of history when you walk inside, because it's a small miniature museum of really interesting things, including a storyboard of Patty's and my life together. From the time we met through the construction of the bakeries, the decorated cake business, when I taught school, and when I was lecturer for Coast and Southern Federal Savings, and some of the other things that we had done.
Well, I didn't know you were a school teacher.
Yes, I taught history and government, economics, and salesmanship.
Well, I should have guessed, because you've had a real interest in those subjects, haven't you?
Well, I have, as a matter of fact.
And in fact, how I came to know about you was, I guess, the fragrance coming out of the bakery. He makes breadsticks this long, I think. And if you see, he has pictures of people enjoying these breadsticks, including deer and bear. And
monkeys and people and clowns and babies and a dog, a wonderful dog named Josh that I have a picture of holding a breadstick in his mouth. And the story of Josh is so fast, I have to tell you. And all of you people listening, this is a true story. This is no malarkey, it's a true story. One Sunday, the dog came down to the shop, and he was outside the back door going, ooh, ooh, like that. I opened the door, looked at the dog, and I says, I know what you want, dog. You want a breadstick. So I gave him a breadstick. Josh took, I didn't know his name at that time. Josh took the breadstick, and he ate it. And then he looked up at me with these big brown eyes that only a golden retriever could have. And he just said, one more, please. And so I gave him one more, and he turned around and he walked off up the hill behind our shop. He did this every Sunday for 6 or 8 months. And then after a period of time had passed, I noticed that Josh hadn't been to our shop recently. And I said, Patty, do you know where Josh has been? The dog. I still didn't know his name. This comes later. But I said, do you know where that dog has been that we always gave the breads to? She says, no. And I says, okay. Well, we were working. And then I walked in. I says, Patty, are you sure you don't know where that dog is or haven't seen him? And she says, no. So I started making calls around to the neighbors. Do they know where this dog is from? And finally, somebody led me to an old gentleman that lived there. And I said, do you have a dog, an old brown dog that came down to the cake shop each Sunday? And he says, it came down to the cake shop each Sunday? And I says, yes, it came to the shop. He says, oh, you must be a-talking about Josh. And I says, is that his name? And he says, yes. He says, well, Josh is right here, and he's still doing fine. And I said, well, that's wonderful, thank you. And about 5 minutes later, here's this scratching at the back door, and I walked out, and I says, Patty. And I looked out, and here's Josh sitting there looking up at me with those big brown eyes. And I said, Patty, grab me a breadstick, please, quick. Gave it to him. He ate it. He turned and looked at me again. He wanted one more. I put it in his mouth, and he walked on off up the hill. And I said, Patty, quick, come out, look. Did you see anybody bring that dog down the hill? She says, no, I didn't. Nobody, Jack. I called the man back, and I says, Mr., and I can't remember his name, Mr. Smith, we'll say, Mr. Smith, did you bring that dog down to get a breadstick? And he says, no, I didn't bring that dog down. I just went out there on that porch, and I says, Josh, them folks down at that bakery, they've been a-missing you. And Patty and I just looked at each other and almost died with laughter, and it was a true story.
Oh, I love it. I love it. We folk out in Merlin just have the most interesting encounters with loggers and people who have been there for a long time. In fact, Werner's place had been a fancy retreat or home for wealthy people from Illinois, I think. So there must have been a time of real opulence. There's that big 3-story house in town, but lots of little houses for millwrights, mill workers.
Well, now everybody that's watching this show might not know where Merlin is. It's a small town, very small town. Actually, the confines of the city itself are probably 500 or 600 inhabitants. But the area around it now is growing and becoming a very wealthy residential district for retired persons from California and other places. Now, Merlin is about 10 miles from the city of Grants Pass, which is on I-5. And this little town is a unique town. At one time, it was sort of the hub of growth in Southern Oregon. Not
with
Grants,
the train.
Yes, with trains and wood and making doors and things like that. But most important, it's filled with wonderful people, fabulous people.
Well, Jack,
with
I'll pat us
wonderful
on the
ideas.
back because we both chose to live in Merlin.
Yeah, well, I chose because there were so many wonderful people there, and I said, can't go wrong living where there are so many good folks.
Well, when Fred Dayton asked me how much I could afford to pay for some raw land, I said $25 a month.
Yeah, that's
How much, Bernie, could you put down? I said, well, 100.
Yeah.
So we were paying on that land a long time before we finally had a chance to come home.
Well, like they said, times they are a-changing.
Times they are.
And we live in changing times, and they're exciting times too. And I think when you live in a place where values do count, and believe me, they do. And incidentally, for anyone out there that does come in and visit, I have a little pamphlet. It's called Values Do Count. And fundamentally, it's based on the idea that no society can exist without values. Values are the rudiments, the foundations for the growth of society. And anytime you're out, you're welcome to pick it up. It talks about it, and it explains it clearly.
Well, now you've got these fun little books that are for sale for nickels and dimes. And that one about the cat.
Kitty cat tales. There's several of them here, and folks, these little books, I try to write books that people can read quickly. I don't expect them to be long books. They're $5 each. This is called Kitty Cat Tales, and it's filled with stories about little kitty cats and the way they work their way into people's hearts, just like puppy dogs do. But kitty cats are kind of special because out in the country, kitty cats wander around from one house to another and pass all the open country, and they find another house where there's cat food on the back porch, and then they decide to stay there.
Yep,
Anyway, the Kitty Cat Tales is a story about that, and it's a really fun book.
Well, you've got short stories about Loma Linda.
Yes.
Is this it?
No, this is What Do I Do Now? This is a book called What Do I Do Now? And this is one that I wrote when Patty, my wife, died. And I wrote it because people came into my shop and talked to me and says, Jack, here are the things you got to do to get over the hurt that's in your heart, because heart hurt goes with death, especially the death of a husband or a wife. And that heart hurt did require effort to eliminate from my being and still retain the memories of the wonderful times and the love that we had for each other and being together for so long. But none of the books or pamphlets really dealt with the problem. they sort of dealt with it superficially. So I wrote the little book titled What Do I Do Now? And it explains exactly the steps that I took in order to vanquish the hurt that was so deep within my heart.
Because you'd been married nearly 50
Nearly
years,
50
worked
years.
side by side out there, and
We did everything together. Everything, absolutely. And we retained through all of that an incredibly wonderful love affair. It never ended. It was a continuously exciting, blossoming love affair. And there was never a day that went by that we didn't show each other our love for each other.
well, I watched it. And Jack and I are relatively new friends because it was his wife and I who were chums. And, you know, she didn't complain. I don't know how long she knew about the cancer. But
Approximately from the very first initial warnings, it was approximately 8 months until she was dead.
well, you know, they give me a better prognosis than that right now. Mine's lymphoma. I didn't know much about it. It's lymph glands that just kind of go out of control.
Yes.
And so they're working on me right now. I don't know if you want to see what's underneath this wig. People keep offering me wigs, including Jack. He's going to let me use his wife's wig, but over at the chemo or at the hospital, they even had hats that they just gave to me. So I've got quite a collection of these.
Isn't that nice?
Got one at Gottschalk's. This will be my summer hat because this wool one's anything but comfy.
You have so many hats there, at least it gives you a different personality each time you go
Absolutely.
in.
And you can kind of laugh.
Sure, you can change it with the day.
Yep, and you said, what color wig are you going to bring me?
I'm going to bring you a brown wig, one that Patty
A
had.
brown one. So then there's the gray one, and there's the blonde one, and
Platinum blonde.
platinum. I never was platinum in my life, maybe when I was 2.
Well, it looks attractive on you anyway.
Thank you, Jack. You've got this big book.
Oh, I've got a couple more. There's one other thing that I'm really interested in is freedom. Because I believe that freedom is the way that God designed the world to exist for man to live in and prosper. And freedom means simply the respect, each person's respect for the rights of others to make their own choices and act on those choices as long as they don't interfere with the rights of others.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah,
Because my right to swing ends at
Right.
before your nose.
Surely, and it's really important. Freedom is the most important thing in the world. It's the reason that the United States of America is the greatest country in the world, with some 6% of the world's population. Even though China is beginning to become an industrial giant, the United States is still responsible for approximately 50% of the world's production.
Isn't that
And it's because of
incredible?
freedom and capitalism and the ideas of individuals. And
Well, your store started from nothing, right?
oh yes, surely. And
You
I
came with a dream.
came with an idea, and we made it into a dream, and we turned a dream into reality.
Isn't that exciting? My dad came to Grants Pass in 1933. He had a truck and knew some people just moved from LA, so we stopped and said hello to Fred Dayton and his folks. And the rest is history. He said, this is where I want to raise my kids. He went back to California, proposed to his wife, who by that time moved to Chicago, and
right?
brought her out, and the rest is history. This was a good place. And I once asked him, I said, Father, if you'd have moved to Eugene and had a car agency, he sold Studebakers, Packards, Datsuns, Mercedes, and Volvos, and I said, you could have made lots more money. He said, oh, sis, it's a good place to call home.
Sure, the money is a pretty superficial thing, except you need it in order to survive. But it's like you say with history. History is nothing more than today reviewed tomorrow. And that's all that it is. Or yesterday being reviewed today, either way you look at it. One is history in the making, and one is history as it exists.
Well, I'm anxious to know about your history, because not only had your wife had cancer, somehow you found out you had cancer?
I had prostate cancer, which is a very common occurrence among men. It's almost predominant among men in their lives, and it's prioritized by man. No woman can have prostate cancer, so we own the rights to it. And right now, the research and development that's taking place in the United States of America, it promises a cure for prostate cancer, certainly within the next decade to decade and a half. And already there are some places where I went to be treated, for example, at Loma Linda University, Seventh-day Adventist University. It has, at Loma Linda, they have a proton accelerator. And the proton accelerator is a very valuable accoutrement for killing the cancerous cells within the prostate and surrounding it, because the proton can be aimed so specifically. It fundamentally and just very simply, it separates from a hydrogen atom, the proton from the rest, the nucleus and the electrons and neutrons and etc. And it accelerates the proton through an accelerator tube like a great racetrack, and it's embedded in 8 foot of concrete. Then it's finally delivered to the patient through a beam similar to radiation, but the depth of the beam is controlled, the shape of the beam is controlled so that it can be delivered accurately to the nth degree. And the effectiveness of it is such that when I was finished with it, they said it was a 93% chance that I would never have cancer again, and no recurrence would happen within 10 years. In fact, over the 2-year period since I had the treatment, the residual PSA ratio, PSA meaning prostate-specific antigen, which is merely it's a measuring device like inches or feet are in terms of length and width. The PSA measures the antigen content in the blood, and it's a measurement that occurs when there is, or at least in some instances, when there is cancer in the prostate. So Loma Linda cured me. I'm wonderful. There are no side effects whatsoever, and there are many other things that are happening in cancer, which is another discussion. But it's on its way.
I thought I was going to be in a research program, and I was so excited because I was going to Portland and be part of a national study, and it didn't happen. I got bumped out of the program. You had an interesting activity while in Loma Linda. You didn't leave the baking behind.
No, I left my son. My son took over the shop, and he baked for me while I was gone. And I even baked some bread and cakes when I was down there. This is a book.
Happy Jack.
My son wrote this book.
Yeah, shoot.
It's called Shoot Minnie Shoot, and just briefly, it's a story of a girls' basketball team that was formed on a reservation in Montana in 1900 by one of the teachers that was there. He saw the Indian girls playing, and the boys had a lot of things to do, but the girls didn't have much to do, so he taught them how to play basketball. They went on and beat everybody in the state of Montana. They ended up becoming the first women's basketball team championship, world champions, in 1904 in Europe. And my son's book, Shoot Minnie Shoot, this one, will be on tapes. They're making it into a tape book, and some movie companies have contacted him. It may well be in the movies, and it should be a wonderful story in a movie too.
Oh, I just saw that some of the movies that are coming out that are independent movies, they did this one about World War II veteran who had been conscientious objector, and he received the Medal of Highest Honor. And people had laughed about him because he wasn't interested in Desmond Doss carrying, and it was just shown at Ashland's Film Festival this week. I wanted to talk a little bit about your son, because while you were gone in Loma Linda, baking bread down there, I heard about you.
Yeah.
And taking it to the hospital and taking the nurses. And
That's true.
He ran the shop.
Yes, he did. And he's been a baker. He learned from my father. And my father was a baker too. My father was the first baker to put a cellophane window in a cake box, so that people could see the cake inside of the box. He was also the first and only man that sold cakes to James Cash Penny. And James Penny sold my father's cakes at the #1 penny store in Kimmerer, Wyoming, which is kind of a unique thing.
Oh, history.
Sure, a lot of history right here.
Well,
and I've certainly enjoyed being here with you today and being with everybody else that's out there watching right now.
And they can come to downtown Merlin.
And the cake shop any Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I'll certainly be glad to talk to you, answer any questions, tell you about the breads that I make, or the cinnamon rolls that I make, or the decorated cakes.
But I'll tell you, if you want my favorite, you get the wheat breadstick.
Oh, she's a lover of breadsticks, the soft German breadsticks.
And he'll put that in the oven just for a little bit, run it through the butter. And, ooh, wow. Well, I slipped on my bear in mind hat because there's nothing like your story about the bear eating your breadsticks. My name being Bernie, and that's a bear name. Bern and Bernard and...
Yes, and we have a picture of the bear eating the breadstick in the cake shop.
So plan to bring the kids and spend a little time, because even if you don't need a loaf of bread, you're welcome. And at Christmas time, they'll have these German...
Stollen. Stollen, it's pronounced.
And those wonderful calendars.
Yes, the German Advent calendars. Advent calendars, there's 25 little windows, one that can be opened up each of the days before Christmas during the Advent season. And I have to tell you that having been here with you is kind of like a Christmas season in a sense, Bernie. We went through a number of books, we went through 25 ideas, and now the Christmas time celebration that we're having is the celebration of having been able to speak to as many people as we could today about freedom, about wonderful stories, about little dogs that love breadsticks, and about happy people.
And deer up brought our house.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Jack,
My
for being my
pleasure.
guest.
Thank
I look
you.
forward to this. Last time we were scheduled, I just got diagnosed and they sent me to Portland, so that has to be rescheduled. And now I'm here with good spirit and a little or no hair.
And you're going to win.
I'm going to win.
And goodbye, everybody. I've enjoyed.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying bye for now.